The crystal chandelier cast fractured rainbows across the marble floor of the penthouse lobby as Maximilian Thornfield's Italian leather shoes clicked with the precision of a metronome. His charcoal Armani suit was impeccable, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his jaw set with the determination of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. In his manicured hand, he clutched a check for $50,000, what he considered more than generous compensation for a problem he intended to eliminate permanently. Miss Delacroix, his voice cut through the afternoon silence like a blade through silk. We need to talk. Serafina looked up from the art therapy supplies she was organizing, her paint-stained apron a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings of the private rehabilitation center. Her dark curls had escaped their ponytail, framing a face that bore the exhaustion of someone who had been working double shifts for months. She recognized him immediately. Everyone in Manhattan knew Maximilian Thornfield, the real estate mogul, whose empire stretched from the Hudson to the East River. Mr. Thornfield, she replied evenly, though her heart began to race. If this is about the insurance claims I've already spoken with, this is about my son. His ice blue eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. About the attachment he's developed to you. Serafina's hand stilled on the paintbrushes. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see 26-year-old Dashiell sitting in the garden, his gentle smile directed at a butterfly that had landed on his sketch pad. Despite his cognitive challenges following a childhood accident, he possessed an artistic gift that took her breath away, and a pure heart that had somehow found its way to hers. Dashiell is making remarkable progress, she said carefully. His motor skills have improved significantly, and his emotional expression through art is irrelevant. Maximilian stepped closer, his presence commanding and intimidating. What's relevant is that you've crossed a line, Miss Delacroix. My son speaks of nothing but you. He draws your portrait obsessively. Yesterday, he asked me when he could marry you. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Serafina felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment but from the protective fury that surged through her whenever someone diminished Dashiell's capacity for authentic emotion. And what did you tell him? She asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Maximilian's smile was as cold as a winter morning in Central Park. I told him the truth, that someone like you could never be part of our family. He placed the check on her art table with deliberate ceremony. This should more than compensate you for your services. Consider it a generous severance package. Serafina stared at the check, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. In that moment, something shifted in the room's atmosphere, an electrical charge that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with two opposing forces recognizing each other's strength. Mr. Thornfield, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than a shout. Your money can buy you many things, but it cannot buy you the right to dictate who your son loves, and it certainly cannot buy my silence about what I've witnessed here. She picked up the check and, without breaking eye contact, slowly tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. 3 days had passed since the torn check incident, and Maximilian found himself doing something he hadn't done in 20 years, questioning his own judgment. He stood behind the one-way mirror of the rehabilitation center's observation room, watching his son work alongside Serafina in what appeared to be perfect harmony. Dashiell's latest painting showed two figures dancing under a starlit sky, their faces radiating pure joy. Beautiful, isn't it? Dr. Helena Carstairs, the center's director, appeared beside him with 2 cups of coffee. Your son has never expressed such emotional depth in his artwork before Miss Delacroix arrived. Maximilian accepted the coffee, but kept his eyes fixed on the scene below. Dr. Carstairs, I specifically requested that woman be removed from my son's care team, and I specifically declined your request. The elderly psychiatrist's tone was matter-of-fact. Dashiell has made more progress in 3 months with Serafina than in 3 years with previous therapists. Would you prefer your son's happiness or your pride, Mr. Thornfield? Before he could respond, Dashiell's laughter echoed through the intercom system. Serafina had accidentally knocked over a jar of paint water, soaking her sleeve. and was now laughing at herself with the uninhibited joy of someone who didn't take herself too seriously. Dashiell immediately offered her his cardigan, a gesture so naturally protective that it made Maximilian's chest tighten unexpectedly. "She's using him," Maximilian said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Gold diggers are experts at manipulation." Dr. Carstairs adjusted her glasses and pulled out a manila folder. "Miss Delacroix has refused every gift Dashiell has offered her, the Cartier watch, the diamond earrings, even the flowers he wanted to buy with his allowance. She's also turned down 3 separate job offers from competitor facilities, each offering double her current salary. Tell me, Mr. Thornfield, what exactly is she gaining from this supposed manipulation?" The question hung in the air as they watched Serafina help Dashiell clean his brushes. Her movements were patient, encouraging, never condescending. She spoke, to him as an equal, not as someone to be pitied or managed. "Furthermore," Dr. Carstairs continued, "are you aware that she's been working here without pay for the past month? Her student loan payments have put her in financial difficulty, but she refused to abandon Dashiell's treatment program." Maximilian's grip tightened on his coffee cup. "Without pay? That's impossible. I review all expenditures personally." She requested that her salary be donated to the center's scholarship fund. She's been working evenings at a gallery in Soho to make ends meet. The doctor's eyes held a knowing glint. "Perhaps you should research the people you judge so harshly, Mr. Thornfield." Through the glass, Serafina was now showing Dashiell how to blend colors on his palette. Her face was animated, passionate about her craft, completely unaware of being observed. For the first time, Maximilian noticed the way she pushed a stubborn curl behind her ear when she concentrated, the graceful movement of her hands as she demonstrated techniques, the genuine smile that reached her eyes when Dashiell succeeded. "She has a master's degree from Columbia," Dr. Carstairs added casually. "Art therapy with a specialization in developmental disabilities. Graduated summa cum laude. Her thesis on emotional expression through creative arts has been cited in 12 peer-reviewed journals." Maximilian felt something uncomfortable twist in his stomach, an emotion he hadn't experienced in decades. Shame. Why didn't she mention her credentials when we spoke? Perhaps because she knew they wouldn't matter to a man who had already decided she wasn't worthy of his consideration. Dr. Carstairs closed the file with a soft snap. "Your son is in love, Mr. Thornfield. Real, honest, pure love. The question is, are you going to destroy that because of your own prejudices? Or are you going to discover what the rest of us already see? That Serafina Delacroix is exactly the blessing your family needs?" As if summoned by their conversation, Serafina looked up toward the observation window. Though she couldn't see through the one-way glass, her gaze seemed to find his across the divide. For a moment that lasted an eternity, Maximilian felt exposed, as if she could see straight through his carefully constructed walls to the man he'd been before grief and responsibility had hardened his heart. Then Dashiell called her attention, back to his painting, and the spell was broken. But something had shifted in Maximilian Thornfield, a crack in the armor he'd worn for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable. The autumn rain drummed against the gallery windows of Lumiere in Soho, creating rivulets that distorted the neon lights of the street below. Serafina moved through the intimate space like a dancer, adjusting spotlights on the contemporary sculptures while soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The evening's exhibition opening, Fractured Beauty, Art from Unconventional Minds, was her passion project, featuring works by artists with various cognitive and emotional challenges. She paused before Dashiell's centerpiece painting, a magnificent canvas that captured the moment when darkness surrenders to dawn. The piece had arrived that morning with a note in his careful handwriting. "For Sarah, who teaches me that broken things can still be beautiful." Her heart had nearly stopped when she read it, not from the sentiment, but from the realization that this public display might finally force the confrontation she'd been dreading. The gallery's brass bell chimed as the first guests arrived: art, collectors, critics, and supporters of therapeutic arts programs. Serafina smoothed her vintage emerald dress, a thrift store find she'd transformed with careful alterations, and prepared to champion the artists whose voices society, too often, silenced. What she hadn't prepared for was the sight of Maximilian Thornfield stepping through the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention even in civilian clothes. Gone was the intimidating business suit, replaced by charcoal slacks and a cashmere sweater that softened his sharp edges without diminishing his aura of power. His silver hair caught the gallery lights, and those piercing blue eyes swept the room until they found her. For a heartbeat, the sophisticated crowd faded into background noise. Serafina felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see, through her carefully constructed professional facade, to the woman who lay awake at night, wondering what it would feel like to be held by someone who looked at her the way Dashiell did, with complete, uncomplicated adoration. Serafina. Marcus Wellington, the gallery owner, appeared at her elbow with champagne flutes. "Darling, you've outdone yourself tonight. The Times critic just spent 20 minutes studying the piece by that young man from your center. What's his name again?" "Dashiell," she managed, her voice steady despite the way her pulse had accelerated. "Dashiell Thornfield." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Thornfield? As in—" He gestured discreetly toward where Maximilian now stood before his son's painting, his expression unreadable. "His father," Serafina confirmed, watching as Maximilian studied, the artwork with an intensity that made her chest tight. What was he thinking? What had brought him here tonight? Across the room, Maximilian felt as though he were seeing his son's soul laid bare on canvas. The painting was extraordinary, not despite Dashiell's condition, but because of the unique way his mind processed emotion and translated it into color and form. The technique was sophisticated, the composition masterful. This wasn't the work of someone to be pitied or protected. This was the work of an artist. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" Serafina's voice came from beside him, soft and melodic against the gallery's ambient noise. She'd approached while he was lost in contemplation, and now stood close enough that he caught the subtle scent of her perfume, something warm and complex like sandalwood and vanilla. "How long has he been painting like this?" Maximilian asked, not taking his eyes from the canvas. "The technical skill was always there," she replied, moving to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "But the emotional depth, the willingness to be vulnerable through his art, that's developed over the past few months. Since you began working with him?" It wasn't a question. "Since he began trusting me enough to share what he truly sees." Serafina turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the gallery lights. "Your son has a gift, Mr. Thornfield. Not just for painting, but for seeing beauty where others see only damage. He looks at a wilted flower and sees the story of its blooming. He looks at a storm cloud and sees the promise of rain for thirsty earth." Maximilian found himself studying her face as intently as he had the painting. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes that spoke of genuine laughter, the small scar on her chin that suggested childhood adventures, the way her lips curved slightly upward even in repose, as if she carried some secret joy. "What does he see when he looks at you?" The question escaped before he could stop it, more intimate than he'd intended. Serafina's breath caught. The simple question carried layers of meaning: professional inquiry, personal curiosity, and something else that made her pulse flutter. "He sees someone who believes in him," she said carefully. "Someone who doesn't treat him like he's broken." "And what do you see when you look at him?" The conversation had shifted into dangerous territory, charged with undercurrents neither of them were prepared to acknowledge. Serafina felt the weight of his attention, the way he leaned slightly closer as if her answer mattered more than it should. "I see a man with the purest heart I've ever encountered," she said honestly. "Someone who loves without conditions, who creates beauty from pain, who sees the world through eyes unclouded by cynicism or greed." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Maximilian felt something crack inside, his chest, not breaking, but opening. When had he last seen the world through anything but the lens of profit margins and strategic advantage? "Mr. Thornfield!" A woman's enthusiastic voice shattered the moment. Patricia Vanderberg, New York's most influential art collector, swept toward them with the grace of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. What a delightful surprise. I had no idea you were involved in therapeutic arts. Maximilian straightened, his business mask sliding back into place. Mrs. Vanderberg, I'm simply here as a father, supporting my son's work. How wonderfully modern of you. Patricia's eyes gleamed with social calculation. You must be so proud. The piece is quite extraordinary. I'm considering it for my private collection. The emotional rawness combined with such technical sophistication, it's exactly what contemporary collectors are seeking. Serafina felt her protective instincts flare. I'm afraid that piece isn't for sale. It's part of the artist's personal collection. Patricia's smile sharpened. Oh, my dear, everything is for sale at the right price. Mr. Thornfield, surely you understand the value of having your son's work in the Vanderberg collection? The exposure alone would be invaluable for his career. Maximilian looked between the two women, Patricia with her calculating smile and designer everything, and Serafina with her fierce protectiveness and thrift store elegance. The contrast was stark, and suddenly he understood something fundamental about the woman he'd dismissed as a gold digger. Mrs. Vanderberg, he said smoothly. Miss Delacroix is correct. The painting is not for sale. Some things have value beyond what money can measure. The words surprised him as much as they surprised Serafina. Patricia's eyebrows rose, clearly taken aback by his response, but she recovered quickly with a practiced laugh. How refreshingly sentimental. Well, if you change your mind. She drifted away toward other potential acquisitions, leaving Maximilian and Serafina alone again. Thank you, Serafina said quietly, her voice carrying genuine gratitude. Dashiell painted that piece as a gift. It represents his first breakthrough in expressing complex emotions. You care about him. Again, not a question. Very much. She met his eyes directly, no longer afraid of what he might see there. Your son has touched my life in ways I never expected. He's taught me that love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, attention, and the courage to be vulnerable. The gallery buzzed around them, but Maximilian felt as though they existed in a bubble of honesty where pretense couldn't survive. I've spent most of my adult life believing the opposite, he admitted. That vulnerability is weakness. That emotion is inefficiency. And now? He gestured toward Dashiell's painting, where colors bled and blended in ways that defied conventional technique, but created something more beautiful than precision ever could. Now I'm wondering if I've been wrong about more than just art. Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. In that moment, surrounded by artwork that celebrated the beauty of imperfection, Maximilian began to understand that his careful, controlled world might be missing something essential, something that a paint-stained art therapist with second-hand clothes and a heart big enough to love his son might be able to teach him. The realization terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. The first snowfall of December transformed Central Park into a crystalline wonderland, and Serafina found herself walking through it at dawn, her boots crunching softly on the pristine powder. She'd barely slept since the gallery opening 3 weeks ago, her mind constantly replaying those charged moments with Maximilian. The way he'd looked at her, the gentleness in his voice when he'd defended Dashiell's painting, it had awakened something in her that she'd tried desperately to suppress. She paused at Bethesda Fountain, where early morning joggers created trails through the snow like brushstrokes on canvas. The city was still quiet, holding its breath in the pre-dawn hush, and she allowed herself to think about the impossible. What if a man like Maximilian Thornfield could see past her modest background to the woman beneath? You're up early. The familiar voice made her spin around, her heart leaping into her throat. Maximilian emerged from behind a snow-laden oak tree, looking unexpectedly vulnerable in a charcoal wool coat and cashmere scarf. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his silver hair catching snowflakes like stars, and his eyes held an uncertainty she'd never seen before. I could say the same about you, she managed, pulling her vintage coat tighter around herself. Do you often take pre-dawn walks in the snow? Only when I can't sleep. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see her breath mingling with his in the frigid air. I've been doing a lot of that lately. The admission hung between them. Loaded with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Serafina felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble under the intensity of his gaze. Mr. Thornfield. Max, he interrupted softly. Please. I think we're past formalities, don't you? The use of his first name felt intimate, dangerous. Like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. Max, she repeated, tasting the word. What are you doing here? I was hoping to find you. His honesty was disarming. Dr. Carstairs mentioned you walk here most mornings before work. I needed to apologize. Serafina blinked in surprise. Apologize? For my behavior when we first met, for the assumptions I made about you, about your motives. He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing the accumulated snow. I've spent the last 3 weeks researching everything about you. Your education, your work, your publications. Did you know you've been cited in the Journal of Therapeutic Arts 6 times? That your innovative techniques have been adopted by rehabilitation centers across the country? She shifted uncomfortably. You didn't need to. Yes, I did. His voice was firm but not harsh. I needed to understand how wrong I was. How completely arrogantly wrong. They began walking along the snow-covered path, their footsteps creating a rhythm in the silence. The park felt magical in its winter dress, as if they were the only two people in the world. There's something else, Max continued, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. Something I discovered that changes everything. Serafina's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Max stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Dashiell's mother, my wife Eleanor, she died in the same accident that caused his injuries. He was 8 years old, and I was so consumed with grief and guilt that I failed him. I hired the best doctors, the most expensive treatments, but I never gave him what he needed most, which was love without conditions, acceptance without trying to fix him. Max's voice cracked slightly. What you've given him in 3 months, I failed to give him in 18 years. Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. The raw pain and idiot, his voice, the vulnerability he was showing her. It was the opposite of the cold, arrogant man who'd tried to buy her off with a check. You love him, she said simply. That's not failure, Max, that's just different. Is it enough, though? When I see him with you, I see a version of my son I thought was lost forever. He laughs, he creates, he hopes. You've given him back his light. They'd reached the Angel of the Water statue, and Max leaned against the stone balustrade, his eyes fixed on the frozen fountain. I've been thinking about what you said at the gallery, about Dashiell seeing beauty where others see damage. I realize that's exactly what you do too. You look at broken people and see their potential. We're all broken in some way, Serafina said softly, moving to stand beside him. The question is whether we let our breaks define us, or whether we find ways to let the light shine through the cracks. Max turned to study her profile, noting the way the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, the gentle curve of her lips, the strength in her delicate features. What broke you, Serafina? The question was so unexpected, so intimate that she almost fled. But something in his tone, genuine curiosity without judgment, made her stay. My father left when I was 12, she said finally. Said he couldn't handle having a daughter who was different. I was dyslexic, struggled in school, didn't fit the mold of what he thought a daughter should be. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, and I learned early that love was something you had to earn, something that could be withdrawn if you weren't perfect enough. That's why you understand Dashiell so well. Perhaps. We both know what it feels like to be dismissed because we don't meet someone else's definition of normal. Max felt a stab of guilt so sharp it was physical. Is that what I did to you? Serafina finally looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the morning light. Initially, yes. But you're here now in the snow at dawn asking the right questions. That has to count for something. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city wake up around them. Then Max did something that surprised them both. He reached out and gently brushed a snowflake from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it sent electricity shooting through both of them. "Serafina," he said, her name a whisper on his lips. "I need to tell you something else." She could barely breathe. "What?" "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the crystalline air between them like a prayer and a confession rolled into one. Serafina felt the world tilt on, its axis, everything she thought she knew, rearranging itself around this impossible moment. "Max," she began, but he shook his head. "I know it's crazy. I know the timing is terrible, with Dashiell's feelings for you, with the complications it would create. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is simple gratitude or admiration. It's more than that. It's been more than that since the moment you tore up that check and looked at me like I was the one who needed saving." Serafina's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "This is impossible. Max, your son—" "My son deserves to see what real love looks like," Max interrupted gently. "Not the desperate attachment of someone afraid of being abandoned, but the choice two people make to build something beautiful together, even when it's complicated and messy and terrifying." Before she could respond, before she could think of all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, Max stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body despite the cold morning air. "Tell me you don't feel this too," he whispered, his gloved hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Tell me I'm imagining the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. The way your breath catches when we accidentally touch. The way you seem to understand me without words." Serafina closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every rational thought screaming at her to run. "I can't tell you that," she whispered, "because it would be a lie." When she opened her eyes, Max was smiling, not his practiced business. Smile, but something real and vulnerable and beautiful. "Then what do we do about it?" "I don't know," she admitted. "This is uncharted territory for me. I've never been in love with the father of someone I care about, someone who trusts me completely." "We figure it out together," Max said simply, "step by step honestly, with Dashiell's happiness as our priority. But Serafina, I can't pretend anymore that I don't want to know what it would feel like to wake up next to you, to hear you laugh at something ridiculous I've said, to watch you create art and light and joy wherever you go." The snow continued to fall around them, muffling the sounds of the awakening city, creating a cocoon of intimacy in the vast park. Serafina felt herself standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing that whatever choice she made in this moment would change everything, forever. "One condition," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "Anything. We tell Dashiell the truth, all of it. He deserves to understand what's happening, to have a choice in how this affects his life." Max nodded slowly. "You're right. He's more capable of handling complex emotions than I've ever given him credit for. He is." "And Max?" She reached up to touch his face, her fingertips cold against his warm cheek. "If we do this, if we explore whatever this is between us, it has to be real. Not an experiment, not a phase you're going through while questioning. Your life choices, real with all the messiness and vulnerability that comes with it." "Serafina Delacroix," Max said, his voice rough with emotion. "I haven't been real with anyone in 20 years, but you make me want to try. You make me want to be the man I see reflected in your eyes, someone worthy of the love you give so freely to others." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. Soft, tentative at first, then deeper as they discovered this new language between them. Serafina felt herself melting into him, all her carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the tenderness of his touch. This wasn't the desperate passion of youth, but something richer, more complex, the attraction of two souls recognizing their match despite all logic and circumstance. When they finally broke apart, Both breathing hard, Max rested his forehead against hers. "No going back now," he murmured. "No going back," she agreed, though her heart was racing with equal parts exhilaration and terror. They walked back through the snow-covered park, hand in hand, neither speaking, but both knowing that everything had changed. By the time they reached the street, where Max's driver waited with the engine running, they had crossed into territory neither had expected to explore. "Dinner tonight?" Max asked as he opened the car door. "Somewhere we can talk properly, plan how to approach Dashiell with this." Serafina nodded, still feeling dazed by the morning's revelations. 7 o'clock? "I'll pick you up at 6:30. And Serafina?" He paused, one foot in the car. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing past the mask I've worn for so long. For helping me remember what it feels like to be human." As his car pulled away, Serafina stood on the sidewalk watching the snow continue to fall, transforming the familiar cityscape into something magical and new, just like her life, she thought. Everything familiar was being transformed into something she didn't quite recognize but was no longer afraid to explore. The woman who walked to work that morning was different from the one who had left her apartment at dawn. She was someone who had been kissed by Maximilian Thornfield in the snow, someone who had admitted to feelings she'd tried so hard to suppress, someone who was about to embark on the most complicated and potentially beautiful journey of her life. The private dining room at Le Bernardin glowed with warm candlelight, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. Max had chosen the venue carefully, intimate enough for serious conversation, elegant enough to match the importance of the evening, yet not so formal as to feel overwhelming. He stood by the window, adjusting his midnight blue tie for the third time, surprised by the nervousness coursing through him. At 52, he'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but the prospect of dinner with Serafina made his hands unsteady. When she appeared in the doorway, his breath caught. She wore a deep burgundy dress that hugged her curves with understated elegance. Her dark hair swept into a sophisticated chignon that revealed the graceful line of her neck. A simple strand of pearls, probably inherited, not purchased, adorned her throat, and her eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty that mirrored his own feelings. "You look breathtaking," he said, moving to pull out her chair, his voice rougher than intended. Serafina felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. This place is incredible, Max. I feel like I'm in a movie." "You deserve to be treated like the remarkable woman you are," he replied, settling across from her. The small table created an intimate bubble amidst the restaurant's refined atmosphere. As they navigated the opening pleasantries, wine selection, menu discussion, the gentle dance of two people discovering each other outside the charged atmosphere of their morning encounter, both were acutely aware of the conversation they needed to have. "We should talk about Dashiell," Serafina said finally, her fingers tracing the stem of her wine glass. "About how we're going to handle this development between us." Max leaned back, studying her face in the candlelight. "I've been thinking about that all day. There's something you should know first, something that might change how you feel about everything." Serafina's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "Dashiell isn't my biological son." The words hung in the air like a revelation that reshuffled everything she thought she understood. Serafina blinked, processing this unexpected information. "Eleanor was 3 months pregnant when we married," Max continued, his voice steady but tinged with old emotion. "The father was a married professor who abandoned her when she told him about the pregnancy. I loved her enough to love her child as my own, and I never regretted that choice. Not even when society whispered about the timeline of our marriage. Max." Serafina reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "That makes you more his father, not less." "Does it? Because I've spent 26 years wondering if I was enough. If a man who didn't know how to express emotion could possibly fill the role of father to a child who needed extra patience, extra understanding, And now? Now I see that the capacity for love isn't determined by biology, it's determined by choice. Every day we choose to love or not to love. I chose to love Dashiell, but I was so afraid of doing it wrong that I kept my distance. I thought providing for him financially was enough. Serafina squeezed his hand. What changed? Max's eyes found hers across the table. You did. Watching you with him, seeing the way he bloomed under your attention, it made me realize that love isn't about perfection. It's about presence, acceptance, and the courage to be vulnerable. Their appetizers arrived, delicate oysters that neither really tasted as they continued their conversation. The restaurant buzzed quietly around them, but they existed in their own world of honesty and discovery. There's something else, Max said, his tone shifting. Something that happened this afternoon that changes our timeline. Serafina set down her fork, sensing the gravity in his voice. What happened? Dashiell asked me directly if I was in love with you. The words hit Serafina like a physical blow. He what? How could he possibly? Apparently Dr. Carstairs isn't the only one who's observant. He said he noticed the way I looked at you at the gallery, the way I've been asking about you more frequently. He's more perceptive than either of us gave him credit for. Serafina felt panic rising in her chest. What did you tell him? The truth. Max's voice was calm, steady. I told him that yes, I was developing feelings for you, but that his happiness was more important than anything I might want. And what did he say? Serafina's voice was barely a whisper. Max smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. He asked if that meant he could call you Mom someday. Serafina's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Max. But that's not all. He said something that made me realize we've been underestimating him all along. Max paused, gathering his thoughts. He said, Dad, I love Sarah like a sister loves a brother or like a best friend loves a best friend. But you love her like a man loves a woman. Those are different kinds of love, and there's room for both. The sophistication of Dashiell's emotional understanding left Serafina speechless. She'd always known he was capable of complex thoughts and feelings, but this level of emotional intelligence surprised even her. He's been watching us, Max continued, paying attention to the dynamics between all three of us, and he's come to his own conclusions about what would make everyone happiest, which is a family. Not conventional, perhaps, but real. He wants you in his life permanently, Serafina, but he's wise enough to understand that the strongest foundation for that is if you and I build something lasting together. Serafina dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, overwhelmed by the evening's revelations. I can't believe how mature he is about this. Most adults wouldn't handle such a complex situation with half his grace. It's because he loves purely, without the complications that fear and ego bring to relationships. Max reached across the table again, taking both her hands in his. He's given us his blessing, Serafina. The question is, what do we do with it? Their main courses arrived, perfectly prepared fish that provided a necessary pause in their intense conversation. As they ate, the atmosphere shifted from heavy revelation to something lighter, more hopeful. Tell me about your dreams, Max said suddenly. Before all this complexity with my family, what did you imagine for your future? Serafina considered the question, surprised by how long it had been since anyone had asked her about her own aspirations. I wanted to open my own therapeutic art center, somewhere dedicated specifically to adults with developmental differences, where they could explore their creativity without judgment or limitation. What would it look like? Her eyes lit up as she described her vision. Large, light-filled studios, adaptive equipment, exhibition spaces where the artists could showcase their work, perhaps even a cafe where the community could gather. As she spoke, Max watched her face transform with passion and purpose. It sounds extraordinary, he said when she finished. What's stopping you? Serafina laughed, but without bitterness. Reality. Startup costs, finding the right location, securing insurance for a specialized population. navigating city regulations. It's not impossible, but it would require resources I don't have. Max was quiet for a long moment, his business mind already calculating possibilities. What if you had a silent partner? Someone who could provide the financial backing while you maintained complete creative and operational control? Serafina's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Max, you can't be serious. I'm always serious about good investments. And you, Serafina, Delacroix are the best investment I've ever considered. This isn't charity. This is recognizing brilliance and providing it with the platform it deserves. His voice was firm, businesslike. You've seen what miracles you can work with limited resources. Imagine what you could accomplish with unlimited ones. I would need complete autonomy, she said slowly, her mind already spinning with possibilities. You'd have it. And it couldn't be seen as payment for this. She gestured between them. Whatever this relationship becomes, it has to be separate from any business arrangement. Absolutely. We draw up proper legal documents, establish clear boundaries between the personal and professional. You'd be the director and primary stakeholder. I'd simply be the financial backer. Serafina stared at him, feeling as though the universe was conspiring to give her everything she'd ever wanted in one impossible evening. Why would you do this? Because I've spent 30 years building an empire that will crumble to dust when I'm gone. But what you're talking about, that leaves a legacy. Lives changed, potential unlocked, beauty brought into the world. That's immortality, Serafina. The conversation continued through dessert and coffee, moving from practical details to deeper, personal revelations. Max told her about his childhood in boarding schools, how success had become his only measure of worth. Serafina shared stories about her mother's struggles, her own battles with feeling inadequate, the way art had saved her from despair. As the evening wound down, they found themselves reluctant to break the spell of intimacy and honesty they'd created. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Max said as they prepared to leave. The board meeting next week. Serafina looked puzzled. What board meeting? Thornfield Industries is expanding into philanthropic ventures. I'm proposing the Therapeutic Arts Center as our flagship project, which means you'd be presenting to some of the most influential people in New York. Max's expression grew serious. They can be challenging. Old money families who judge people by bloodlines and bank accounts. Are you warning me that I won't fit in with your world? Serafina asked, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. I'm telling you that my world is going to have to adapt to you, not the other way around. Max stood and moved around the table to help her with her coat. Because you're not just entering my life, Serafina. You're transforming it. As they walked toward the restaurant's exit, Max's hand found the small of her back, a gesture both protective and possessive. The valet brought his car around and they settled into the warm leather interior for the drive to her apartment. Dashiell wants to have dinner with both of us tomorrow night, Max said as they glided through the streets of Manhattan. He's planning to attempt to cook his specialty, spaghetti carbonara. Serafina laughed, the sound filling the car's intimate space. That sounds perfect. Absolutely perfect. When they arrived at her building, a modest brownstone in the village that was charming despite its obvious age, Max walked her to the door. The evening's revelations hung between them, weighty and precious. Tonight changes everything, Serafina said, her key in her hand but making no move to use it. Is that what you want? Everything to change? She looked up at him. This man who had entered her life as an adversary and was rapidly becoming something she couldn't have imagined. 3 months ago, I would have said I was perfectly content with my simple, predictable life. But now I can't imagine going back to who I was before I met you and Dashiell. You've both challenged me to be braver, to want more, to believe that I deserve more. Max cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. You deserve everything, Serafina. Everything beautiful and challenging and extraordinary that life has to offer. This time, when he kissed her, It was different from their morning encounter in the snow. This kiss was deeper, more certain, filled with promise and possibility. Serafina felt herself melting into him, into this new version of herself that could be bold enough to love a man like Maximilian Thornfield. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Tomorrow night, Max murmured against her forehead. Dinner with Dashiell, the beginning of figuring out how to be a family. A family, Serafina repeated wonderingly. The word felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she'd always wanted to learn but never dared attempt. Sleep well, beautiful, Max said, stepping back reluctantly. Dream about art centers and possibilities and everything you're going to accomplish. As Serafina watched his car disappear into the night traffic, she realized that for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't afraid of the future. Instead, she was excited by its infinite possibilities. Inside her small apartment, surrounded by her modest belongings and works in progress, she felt like a completely different person than the woman who had left that morning. She was someone who had been kissed by snow and candlelight, someone who had been offered the world and found herself brave enough to consider accepting it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new steps toward building something unprecedented. But tonight, she was simply a woman in love, surrounded by the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the promise of dreams about to come true. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel sparkled with the warmth of hundreds of candles and the laughter of New York's most distinguished guests. The inaugural gala for the Delacroix Center for Therapeutic Arts was in full swing, a celebration that marked not just the opening of Serafina's dream facility, but the transformation of 3 lives that had found their way to each other against all odds. Serafina stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching Max waltz with Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the 90-year-old matriarch of Manhattan society, who had become an unexpected champion of the center after witnessing Dashiell's artistic genius firsthand. The sight of Max, resplendent in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, charming the elderly woman with genuine warmth rather than calculated business strategy, still amazed her. The man who had once tried to buy her off with a check had evolved into someone who led with his heart while maintaining his sharp business acumen. "You look like you're in a dream." Dr. Carstairs appeared beside her, elegant in midnight blue silk, a glass of champagne in each hand. "I feel like I am," Serafina admitted, accepting the champagne gratefully. Her own gown, a flowing creation, in deep emerald that Max had insisted on commissioning from a designer friend, made her feel like a princess from a fairy tale she'd never dared imagine herself in. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure this is all real." "Oh, it's real, my dear, and well-deserved." Dr. Carstairs nodded toward the exhibition area, where Dashiell's latest series, a collection of paintings depicting the journey from isolation to connection, drew admiring crowds. "Look at what you've accomplished. 47 artists already enrolled, a waiting list 3 months long, and interest from institutions across the country wanting to replicate your model." But Serafina's attention had shifted to Dashiell himself, dapper in his first custom tuxedo, carefully explaining his artistic process to Patricia Vanderberg, who listened with rapt attention. His confidence had blossomed over the past months, nurtured by the security of knowing he was loved unconditionally by 2 people who had learned to love each other just as deeply.
"Miss Sarah!"
Dashiell's voice carried across the room as he spotted her. His face lit up with the pure joy that never failed to warm her heart. "Come meet Mrs. Vanderberg. She wants to commission a piece for her museum." As Serafina made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and admiring words about the center, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. The board meeting Max had warned her about had indeed been challenging, a room full of skeptical faces questioning whether someone from her background could handle such an ambitious project. But when she'd presented her vision with passion and detailed planning, when Dashiell had quietly set up an easel and painted during her presentation, the room had been transformed. By the end, even the most conservative board members were asking how they could increase their investment. "Serafina, darling." Patricia Vanderberg air-kissed her cheeks with the enthusiasm of someone who had completely reversed her initial impression. "This young man is extraordinary. And this center, it's revolutionary. I've been telling everyone that therapeutic arts is the future of rehabilitation. Dashiell is one of our most talented artists, Serafina said, her arm sliding naturally around his shoulders. And one of our best ambassadors. I was just telling Mrs. Vanderberg about the mural project, Dashiell said, his eyes bright with excitement. How we're going to paint stories on the walls of children's hospitals. Brilliant concept, Patricia gushed. Art as medicine, healing through creativity. You know, when I first met your father at that gallery opening, I thought he was being sentimental about supporting your work. Now I see he was being visionary. The music shifted to something slower, more romantic, and Serafina saw Max approaching through the crowd, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that still made her pulse quicken after 6 months together. Mrs. Vanderberg, would you mind if I borrowed my fiancé for a dance? Max's voice held warmth and barely contained excitement. Patricia's eyebrows rose with delight. Fiancé? Oh my goodness, when did this happen? Serafina's breath caught. They had talked about marriage, dreamed about it in quiet moments, but Max hadn't officially proposed. She looked at him with questioning eyes, and he smiled, that real, vulnerable smile she had learned to treasure. About 30 seconds ago, when I realized I couldn't wait another moment to make this official, Max said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. The crowd around them began to notice, conversations quieting as he dropped to one knee in the middle of the plaza ballroom. Serafina Delacroix, his voice carried clearly in the sudden hush. 6 months ago, you tore up my check and told me that some things can't be bought. You were right. Love can't be purchased, happiness can't be negotiated, and the most precious things in life are the ones we choose to give freely. Serafina felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the entire gala seemed to hold its breath. You've taught me that strength comes from vulnerability, that family is built on choice rather than obligation, and that the most beautiful art comes from hearts brave enough to be broken and mended again. Max opened the box to reveal a stunning vintage ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the ballroom's light like captured starlight. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Dashiell's mother, and my partner in building a life more beautiful than anything I ever dared imagine? Through her tears, Serafina saw Dashiell bouncing on his toes with excitement, Dr. Carstairs dabbing at her eyes, and hundreds of faces watching with warm anticipation. But most clearly she saw Max, the man who had begun as her adversary and become her greatest love, kneeling before her with his heart in his hands. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Max. Yes to all of it. The ballroom erupted in applause as Max slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her deeply. The kiss tasted of champagne and promises, of dreams realized and new adventures beginning. Can I be the best man? Dashiell asked when they finally broke apart, his question sending ripples of laughter through the crowd. You're already the best man I know, Max said, pulling his son into their embrace. And yes, absolutely. As the orchestra resumed playing and couples returned to dancing, the three of them stood together in their own bubble of happiness. The Delacroix Center represented Serafina's professional dreams come true, but this family they had built from the most unlikely circumstances, was the greatest masterpiece any of them had ever created. So when's the wedding? Dr. Carstairs asked, joining their group with barely contained excitement. Soon, Serafina said, looking up at Max with eyes full of love and possibility. But first we have a center to run, artists to nurture, and a whole world to show that beautiful things can bloom in the most unexpected places. Just like us, Max murmured against her ear, making her shiver with happiness. Just like us, she agreed. As the evening continued around them, guests touring the center's facilities, artists displaying their work, supporters pledging ongoing funding, Serafina found herself marveling at the unexpected paths that had led to this moment. She thought about the young woman who had cleaned paintbrushes in a modest rehabilitation center, never dreaming she could catch the attention of Manhattan's elite, let alone win the heart of one of its most powerful men. But then she looked at Dashiell, animatedly describing his latest project to a group of fascinated donors and at Max, his arm around her waist as he discussed expansion plans with potential investors, and she realized that this wasn't about transformation as much as it was about recognition. They had all simply learned to see themselves as clearly as they saw each other, not as broken things to be fixed, but as beautiful beings worthy of love, respect, and infinite possibility. The evening wound down with Dashiell's impromptu performance, a spoken word piece he had written about finding family in unexpected places, delivered with the confidence of someone who had learned that being different was not a limitation but a gift. The applause was thunderous, and Serafina felt her heart might burst with pride. Later, as they rode home together in Max's car, home now being the penthouse they had redesigned to accommodate all three of them, Serafina reflected on the miraculous chain of events that had brought them together. "Regrets?" Max asked softly. His fingers intertwined with hers, the new ring catching the city lights streaming past their window. "Only one," Serafina said, making both men look at her with concern. "What's that?" Dashiell asked from across the car. "That I didn't tear up that check more dramatically, maybe thrown the pieces in the air like confetti." Their laughter filled the car, rich and warm and full of the joy that would characterize their life together, a life built on the radical idea that love sees beyond surface differences to the extraordinary beauty, waiting to be discovered in every human heart. Outside, Manhattan glittered with possibility, and inside their car, three people who had found their way to each other against all odds settled into the comfortable silence of a family coming home. 6 years later, epilogue, the Delacroix Centers had expanded to 12 cities across North America, each one a beacon of hope for individuals whose potential had been overlooked by traditional institutions. The original Manhattan location had become a pilgrimage site for anyone interested in therapeutic arts, its walls lined with transformative works by artists who had found their voices through creative expression. In the largest studio, now flooded with morning sunlight, Serafina sat cross-legged on the floor with their 4-year-old daughter Isabella, whose dark curls and blue eyes marked her as perfectly balanced between her parents. They were finger-painting together, creating abstract masterpieces that would join the collection of family art covering every wall of their home. "Mama, look." Isabella held up her hands, covered in rainbow colors. "I'm painting with my fingers, like Uncle Dashiell taught me." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Serafina said, helping her daughter add handprints to their canvas. "Art comes from the heart, remember?" Through the studio's windows, she could see Max and Dashiell in the garden, working together to plant the spring flowers that would bloom in time for the center's anniversary celebration. Dashiell, now 32, had become the center's director of artist development, his gentle wisdom and lived experience making him the perfect mentor for newcomers still finding their confidence. Max looked up and caught her watching. His smile, as warm and loving as the day he had proposed in the Plaza Ballroom. He said something to Dashiell, who laughed and made shooing gestures toward the house. A few minutes later, Max appeared in the studio doorway, his gardening clothes dusty and his silver hair slightly mussed. "How are my favorite artists this morning?" "Daddy!" Isabella launched herself toward him, paint-covered hands and all. Max caught her without hesitation, lifting her high in the air as she giggled. "Should I be concerned that I'm covered in rainbow paint?" he asked Serafina with mock seriousness. "It's an improvement," she teased, rising to kiss him hello. "Very avant-garde." "Dashiell wants to know if we're still on for lunch at the new cafe. Apparently they have those chocolate croissants Isabella loves." "Can we, Mama, please?" Isabella's blue eyes, so like her father's, sparkled with hope. "Of course we can," Serafina said, already mentally calculating how long it would take to clean paint off a 4-year-old and make herself presentable. As they gathered their things and prepared to join Dashiell for their weekly family lunch, Serafina paused to look around the studio that had become the heart of everything they had built together. The walls were covered with artwork from hundreds of students, each piece a testament to the transformative power of being seen, understood, and encouraged to shine. But the most beautiful creation in the room, she knew, wasn't hanging on any wall. It was the family they had built, unconventional, imperfect, and absolutely perfect in its unique configuration of love. Ready? Max asked, Isabella now clean and changed, bouncing with excitement at the prospect of chocolate croissants. Ready, Serafina said, taking his outstretched hand. And as they walked together toward their next adventure, lunch with Dashiell, afternoon in the park, evening planning the center's expansion to London, she marveled once again at the mysterious alchemy that had transformed a confrontation between strangers into a love story that continued to write itself, one beautiful day at a time. The heart, she had learned, sees beyond everything that doesn't matter to find everything that does.